All right.
So we prepare some questions for you.
Yes.
So we are honored to be selected. And why did you initiate the Biennale College Cinema program?
We started the first edition in 2013. This is the 13th edition this year. And I think it came from the fact that the Venice International Film Festival is the oldest in the world. It was the first film festival. And there's always been an open-mindedness of the Biennale because the Venice Biennale is an umbrella organization and it has different events. It runs the film festival, the art biennale, the architecture biennale, and the dance biennale, music and theater biennale. So there is always a culture of looking beyond just the nature of a film festival, for instance, and keep trying to invent new ways of supporting artists. So the Biennale College came from this philosophy of trying to support new filmmakers who are coming with a project of a first or second feature film, and that can be done with a micro budget to support a new generation of artists. In 2016, I created with the Biennale organization the same college for immersive, for virtual reality at the time, we called it, for the same reason, to try and support new makers, new artists doing this. So it's a way of expanding the mission of a festival beyond just showing finished films, but truly supporting new artists.
Cool. What's your observation on immersive storytelling since the program's launch? Did you find any changes during these years?
Yes, I can see how the medium of immersive is being handled by artists and by makers now in a more mature way. By this I mean there is less fascination for the gimmicky aspect of VR, saying, oh wow, all these effects and it's so new, and every time when there's a new technology it's easy to become fascinated just by what the camera does. Now we have finished this phase, and the way artists are approaching virtual reality and immersive technologies is more around emotions, impact, understanding the difference of telling a story in VR as opposed to telling it in flat in cinema, understanding the position of the viewer, the relationship of the viewer with the story, what 360 viewing does in terms of emotion, memories, because the input of an experience in the brain through 360 is much deeper. It lasts longer. So we are more informed today about what it does and how it works. And so more artists are now looking into it with that knowledge. So it's less naive than it was in the beginning, and it's completely normal. So I find it very, very interesting, and there's an incredible range of subjects and themes and forms that are being made today.
And do you think it's more closer to film or to the interactive side of game?
It depends how you look at it. In the shape, you could say yes, it's a sort of a mix between game aesthetics or game dynamics and game interactivity. There's also a feeling that it's a bit like apps, where you have to do things. But my experience is that when you, and it has to do with film, for instance, particularly in 360 video, the connection is obvious, but it's only on the surface. I find that when you look at the impact that it has, it's completely different. The memory one keeps of an experience in 360 or in full immersive is very different from the memory of a film, I find, and it's sometimes hard to express and hard to recognize. My wish, though, is that it would be on the technological side. I find that that the technology is not going fast enough to transform the headsets into glasses, because until we have access to a technology that is light enough that we can carry glasses in our pockets, it will be difficult to make it a daily thing that we can use. It still is too clunky and too difficult for everyone to have it. So I'm hoping that, because you were asking me about the changes that I see, I would respond by saying I don't see enough change in going fast enough towards a technology that would be small enough to carry. And my hope is that the technology will keep evolving to that point and that it will not collapse before we reach that point. Because it's only at that point that it will become attractive and sexy, to have immersive glasses. Right now, the headsets are too big and too complicated. So it's getting better every year. But until they are like this, or like the Ray-Ban Meta glasses, it will remain something that will not be mainstream.
Is there any technologies or new trends that particularly excite you?
There are. It seems like every week you hear about a new improvement, a new way of doing immersive, a new software, even new hardware, that make the VR experience nicer and nicer all the time. So that's great. But it seems to me to be a current flow of improvements, but not enough, not enough to completely change the landscape. And I'm waiting for the day when the technology can perform well enough. So I don't see any big revolutionary thing that would really transform. I think adaptability, when I read about things that can travel, from one software to the other or one platform to the other in an easier way, I think that's good, because the more you can have a true metaverse where you can travel from one platform to another without having to change the equipment or the software or the avatars that you are using, that would be great. I think that probably the last wow effect that I had was with the Apple Vision Pro, because I think there's a really big difference.
How do you foresee the convergence of XR and new technologies like AI in the next 5 years?
I think it's going to be major. We will talk about it during this workshop. I see how quickly it's become really interesting. I've been following closely, for instance, a festival called Artifact that was just closed at the end of 2024. That showed about 200 films that were made by AIs, and I was very, very impressed. I don't think it replaces the finished film, but for instance, it can be an incredible tool for storyboarding or for giving a very, very precise idea of what the final experience will be. And I think it applies to VR very well. Not yet. There is no easy AI transport software that would allow the same thing that happens on a flat screen to VR directly, to my knowledge. Maybe there is, but I don't know about it. And I've researched it and I haven't found anything. So it's not here yet, but it's coming for sure. It's going to become something very, very common. And I see it as a great way of helping visualize and share the vision of a project before the project happens.
What are the key challenges when transitioning from traditional mediums like film to XR?
I'm working on a project right now with a traditional filmmaker, and he's going to make his first VR film, and he's a very well-established filmmaker, and we are trying to help him make this film. and educating him to stop thinking in a limited frame, but thinking of full environment. And I'm surprised how difficult it is to change the mindset and the way he visualizes what he needs to do. And although we keep showing him things and we keep, talking about it, I think it's only when we will be shooting that he will fully understand. There is a very deeply rooted need for control that film directors have. And they find it hard not to be able to make sure that their viewer will be looking at something they feel is important. And they keep thinking that they need to control the viewer's experience. While the level of control that a director has in XR is not on the exact spot of what the viewer will see, but on the overall environment in which they are, and it's a completely different way of approaching the action and narrative progression. So it's something that is quite difficult to share, and I feel that a lot of film directors are quite worried and stressed by that aspect. When you tell them, but if I'm showing something that is happening here in front of me, and they choose to look in the back because they want the painting on the door, then what happens? And they're completely worried about that. And it's true that it's a different way of thinking, and it's like making them understand that it's like in real life, that sometimes you're not looking at what should be seen, but the whole environment is what counts. And not having the full control that the viewer is going to see something is going to produce a different experience, which is part of the VR experience. And it will be just as interesting, but different. And that agency that the viewers have is part of the experience, and it's almost a psychological therapy for a director to let go. And letting go, as we know, is sometimes very difficult, psychologically and emotionally. Yeah. But it's in the letting go that lies the secret of good directorship in VR.
Yeah. I think since Dami has a background in theatre, so the transition for her from theatre to VR is less painful than film, because theatre we're dealing with...
There is more to look at.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. For instance, I've had that discussion several times before. I like to think that in theatre... I was a dancer myself a long time ago, so I'm very, very familiar with the performing arts scene. And I like to think that if I go to a theatre, my experience of the performance can also include me looking at my neighbors, or looking behind, or looking at the ceiling, and hearing the voice of what's going on. That is also part of the ritual. So, I think that it's an easier transition from performing arts to immersive than from film to immersive. And we're finding this more and more.
Yeah. So, last question. What advice would you offer to XR creators?
I think because we are still in a moment where we don't really know the rules of what works and what doesn't work, we're learning as we go, and we're learning from our mistakes, not necessarily our mistakes, but the mistakes of our friends or colleagues who are also working in immersive. It is hard to be sure of what works and what doesn't work. Like if you say that in a moment of your piece you really want people to empathize with a cat, how can you make this? We don't know. For the moment there are no real rules. So it's all about exploring, but the biggest challenge is to learn from others' works. So watching and viewing as much immersive works that have been done to this day by other people, I think is very, very important, to understand what has been done and what works for you. This is a reason, for instance, why here in the college we are very happy that we have the VR lab, which is the library of dozens of experiences and works that you probably have not seen before, because right now the biggest difficulty of access to VR experiences is distribution. There are no platforms, aside from, let's say, Meta or HTC that offer these kinds of content. So trying to see as much as possible to understand how others are doing and seeing what you like, I think is a key advice. We've seen here in the college that by offering the VR lab as a platform, we are offering something that is very, very rare, very difficult to access. So, and we found also exactly what I said, that every time the makers and the producers who come here for the college, they appreciate the access to the VR lab so much. They always want to have more time to see more and more and more, because you do learn this way. So I think we're not in the complete beginning, but so there's enough that has been made that you can pick up and see or verify what works for you or not. So I think viewing as much and then testing, trying something and then see how people react. And yeah, not be afraid to try things that are maybe not planned by the makers of the technology, and try and hijack the technology in making it do what you want to do.
Yeah.
But we have this whole week to answer your question, I think. Cool. During this week, it's a little bit what it's all about.
Yeah.
That last question.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.